Human rights were unaddressed. And now we have these 5 different mutually reinforcing areas where human rights are emphasized, to put it mildly. So if you could speak to the issue of what they're buying, and of course, what is Iran buying? Like perhaps Sudan, weapons, surface-to-air missiles in the case of Iran. You point out that fighter jets and tanks, battle tanks, are being bought. That to me would be a gross exploitation of the easing of sanctions. Let me ask you, who's in charge? You know, Bashir wanted to go to Turkey, and the European Union asked Erdogan to arrest him and send him to Hague pursuant to the ICC indictment, and yet he's traveled some 74 times over the years, although he did not go to Indonesia because several countries would not allow overflight airspace traversing by his aircraft, so that put the kibosh on that. But China had him there, as we know, and others have as well. South Africa as well, and there's a court case. Is he in charge? If maybe you could speak, maybe Ambassador Lyman, you might want to speak to that as well. Who really is calling the shots in Sudan? Are there other people in the administration who present a more benign face to us, the Americans, and to the Europeans, and to the Africans, and everyone, that then can cobble together deals while the master genocideer, who ought to be at the Hague for crimes against humanity and the like, continues to pull the strings? Again, as I said, when I met with him in 2005, along with Greg, we talked humanitarianism, access, Darfur camps, the ending of the hostilities, and supporting the Janjaweed. And what did he talk about just about the entire time? Lift the sanctions, lift the sanctions. I met with Secretary Kerry when he was still Chairman John Kerry, when he was still on the Senate side, and he was asking for sanctions relief there. So another question would be the origin of this. Was it a good, positive, natural evolution of now is the time to make a deal to try to help the humanitarian crisis, or was this something that was sought after for a long time that gives us a semblance of, maybe a better situation there, but maybe it doesn't. If they're rearming and building up their capabilities like Iran now, become far more menacing and ominous if they get that capability, buying more battle tanks and fighter jets. And you, Mr. Detoni, in your testimony, you make reference to the Enough Project and their new report entitled Border Control from Hell, how the EU's migration partnership legitimizes Sudan's malicious state. Now, for seemingly very selfish reason, the EU is selling this capability to mitigate the flow of, and here it is, without objection, we'll put the parts of it, certainly the executive summary in, but they're able to mitigate the flow of refugees when we're providing them a capability that could be used for far more nefarious purposes. So if you could speak to that. And then you make the statement, Mr. Detoni, and the others might want to speak to this. On the issue of humanitarian access to the 2 areas, South Kordofan and Nuba Mountains and the Blue Nile State, I do not believe any humanitarian access has crossed the battle lines from Khartoum into the 2 areas. Is that still accurate as of today? In all of your opinions, that would be an important, part of this. And again, why January 17th? Why wasn't this, was that the natural time when this came to fruition for the administration to make this decision? And I ask that, to hand an incoming administration a well thought out policy that came to its natural fruition on January 17th to promulgate this, or was it, should it have been done 6 months ago, or not at all, and wait for the new administration to, I'm baffled by the timing of it. As you're going out the door, you say, here, take this. It may be very well crafted, but I just, I would appreciate your insights on that and these other questions, again, like who's in charge for real in Khartoum. Mr. Brooks-Rubin.
Thank you, Representative Smith. Chairman Smith, there's a lot there. I guess let me just try to answer a couple, and if I've missed, I'll keep coming back. In terms of the purchases that we've seen, reports and information about what's happening on the ground continue to come in, and we're happy to provide more information on those purchases of interest. I think the bigger point is, and one of the debates around the sanctions lifting is this really going to matter? Does this really change the economic situation on the ground? And I think one thing that's important and reflective of purchases like these are, it opens up the ability for there to be one-time purchases like this. Maybe long-term investment remains questionable because of the overall business environment in Sudan, but now the banking channels are open. Now without fear of transactions being rejected or blocked by a bank along the way. So you create an enabling environment that then allows a regime to then decide what it's going to do. And again, from our assessment so far, although there have been the cessation of hostilities that's been discussed, the long-term planning that envisions the sanctions being removed altogether is looking ahead to the ability to make these kinds of weapons purchases and really entrench itself further. We're not, what we're doing by this policy is essentially enabling the regime to just simply entrench itself further without creating any mechanism to have these discussions about a broader democratic process and peace process in the country, which in some way leads me to the Iran question. And you're absolutely right that human rights has been sort of consistently left off the table in all of these situations. I think what's notable in the Iran example is that we still do maintain a pretty significant level of sanctions. Not all, and certainly has enabled quite a lot of the activity by the Iranian regime, but we still maintain a pretty, at some level, some robust sanctions in place. With Sudan, we're talking about still taking these limited steps, but yet giving away the rest of the existing sanctions program without replacing it with anything, which seems in a positive and really, again, as you said, Mr. Chairman, giving away the concept of human rights. Your reference to Ambassador Natsios is a useful one. In preparing for the hearing, I went back and looked at a press conference that he and Deputy Secretary Negroponte and former OFAC Director and Acting Undersecretary Adam Zubin had way back in 2007 when I was at Treasury, when they announced Plan B, which was the sort of rollout of Darfur sanctions, which was really supposed to put pressure on the regime to stop what was happening in Darfur, to stop a genocide. The sanctions that were announced at those times weren't strong. We were really just identifying companies that were already sanctioned, but we were promised, and Ambassador Natsios' remarks in that press conference really say that we're going to use pressure and we're going to use robust enforcement to really get at these critical issues of human rights, and that pressure was the only way to deal with the regime in Sudan. And we just haven't seen that. We just never saw that happen. Human rights was never truly tied to pressure in any meaningful way. And that's what we think needs to happen now. And you need to have these independently verifiable benchmarks around peace and human rights and religious freedom in order to get there. In terms of the question about sort of where did this come from and where did it originate, and obviously a lot of what was happening within the administration isn't entirely clear, but it does certainly seem to us that this was, at least the decisions at the end about what sanctions relief to put on the table seemed hastily created, and sort of, as you said, sort of handing the next administration here, we're giving you something that you need to make sure you deal with. And to continue the process going, obviously something was needed in order to keep the Sudanese engaged, but it certainly did not ever appear to be a sort of, as you were indicating, may have been preferable, a long explained and thought out process. This was something that was really only kind of announced at the very end, and there wasn't the level of deliberation and at least engagement with the NGO community that we had at the very end. And the executive order says there has to be consultation with the NGOs moving forward. But what that process was, why we got there, wasn't really ever clearly established. So I think I'll stop with those for now, and happy to come back and address the others.
Who's in charge? Did you want to touch on that?
Who's in charge? I mean, I think that's a question maybe others may be better placed to answer than me specifically. I think it is a real question that I think we all struggle to really understand. And I think as we've looked at the the violent kleptocratic network that the regime and its insiders have established, you have to, I mean, clearly we have to deal with President Bashir, but there are a lot of other key actors, key advisors, and really these entities like the NIS and key corporations that really also play an important role. And I think we haven't really talked about the impact of the Gulf and the dynamic between the way the government of Sudan, the sort of shifting alliances between Iran and the Gulf, and the role that the countries in the Gulf play, both in terms of investments that they have within, or if you want to call them investments, essentially giveaways by the government of Sudan in exchange for cooperation. So I think the role of the Gulf is also critical to explore here in terms of the broader picture of who's in charge.